Hey, Mike here. I just wanted to let you know that you can listen to Dark Poutine early and ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime. Welcome back to Dark Poutine. We are the darkest of the poutines, I do believe.
Haha.
How are you, Matthew?
I'm okay. How are you doing?
I'm okay, too. I didn't say my name this week. I thought people know who I am by now.
People know who you are.
But if you're just joining us, I am Mike Brown, and that's Matthew Stockton.
We're recording on a Friday today.
On a Friday, yep. It's actually really warm in here because I can't have any fans or the air exchanger going at all when we're recording because
you get that humming sound if there's a fan.
Matthew, that blue cloudy sky behind you looks like you're angelic today. I don't know what the deal is.
I'm definitely not angelic.
No.
Cityscape.
Oh, the cityscape. Oh, that's really nice. What a rough life you have, your terrible view. Anyway, let's do this thing.
The views, information, and opinions expressed during the Dark Poutine podcast are solely those of the producer and do not necessarily represent those of Curious Cast, its affiliate, Global News, nor their parent company, Chorus Entertainment.
Dark Poutine is not for the faint of heart or squeamish. Our content is often intense, and some listeners may find it disturbing. We're not experts on the topics we present, nor are we journalists. We are ordinary Canadian schmucks chatting about crime and the dark side of history. Let's get to it. Put on your toque, grab yourself a double-double and an Nanaimo bar. It's time to scarf down some Dark Poutine.
You are responsible for obtaining and maintaining at your own cost all equipment needed to listen to Dark Poutine. Dark Poutine can be addictive. Side effects may include, but not be limited to, pausing and questioning the system, elevated heart rate, pondering humanity, odd looks from colleagues as you laugh out loud at work, family members not into true crime worrying about you. Positive side effects may include some perspectives and opinions that you disagree with, as well as some wokeness and empathy. If you don't think Dark Poutine is for you, consult your doctor immediately.
March 17th, 1960, 6 p.m. 10 meters below a quiet residential street in North York, Toronto, 12 men were welding steel plating inside a water main tunnel beneath the Don River. The tunnel was less than 2 meters wide. To pass one another, the men had to drop to their knees and crawl beneath a 36-inch pipe. The temperature had been climbing for hours. There were no fire extinguishers down there, no hard hats, no safety shoes, and no resuscitators. The telephone that was supposed to connect the tunnel to the surface had been removed for repairs. The one way to signal trouble from below was a switch wired to a red light above the ground. It was on the far side of the smoke that was now moving through the shaft. No one was able to reach it. The neighborhood above them was called Hogg's Hollow. Within hours, it would become the most reported address in Canada. Their names were Pasquale Allegrezza, Giovanni Carriglio, Giovanni Fusillo, Alessandro Mantella, and Guido Mantella, Alessandro's brother. All 5 had come from southern Italy within the last 4 years. All 5 had come to Toronto for the same reason every man in that tunnel had come: work. The city was expanding at a pace that devoured labor, and these new Canadians had supplied it. In the tunnels, in the trenches, in the compression chambers no one else wanted to enter. The next morning, the Toronto Telegram ran its front page with 4 words above the fold: sealed in a hellhole. 12 men had gone underground on St. Patrick's Day, The air thickened, the water rose. 5 of them never came back up. You are listening to Dark Poutine episode 422, The Hogg's Hollow Tunnel Disaster. To understand what happened at Hogg's Hollow, you have to understand the world those 5 men had stepped into when they arrived in Canada. By 1960, Italy had surpassed the United Kingdom as Canada's primary source of immigrants. Most arrived on short-term labor contracts carrying little English and fewer rights. They came from the poor lands of southern Italy, peasant farmers, coal miners, men who had spent their lives doing physical work for subsistence wages and had been told that Canada was something different. La Terra del Speranza, the land of hopes. Toronto was in the middle of a construction explosion. The post-war suburban boom was reshaping the city's edges at a speed that the existing labor force could not keep up with. Immigrants were the ones who laid the pipe, poured the concrete, and crawled into the tunnels, and overwhelmingly at the time, they were Italian. Of the roughly 25,000 men employed annually in the suburban development belt around Toronto in 1960, between 15,000 and 20,000 were Italian. They formed the backbone of the southern construction business, and they were paying for it with their bodies, and sometimes their lives. The Italian construction workers were largely unorganized. They were spread across dozens of subcontractors, spoke different dialects, and had no collective leverage against the employers who set their wages and their conditions, which were usually poor. Bruno Zanini, the president of the Immigrants' Union that had staged 2 bitter strikes in the years surrounding Hogg's Hollow, understood exactly what that fragmentation cost them. "You're slaves," he told a reporter from the Canadian Weekly in 1962, "because you're all divided."
Yeah, this quote sort of hits hard because it's talking more than unions.
Mm-hmm.
What Zanini understood was that, isolation is powerlessness. And if you think about workers at the time, you have different dialects, different villages, limited English, fear of deportation, fear of losing work, men competing against other desperate men for the same jobs. And, that fragmentation benefits the people at the top. It always does.
Right.
Once workers stop seeing themselves as individuals barely surviving and start seeing themselves as a group with shared interests, then that balance changes. And honestly, you can see versions of that dynamic everywhere now, not in just construction. Any system works better for the people in charge when the workers are exhausted, temporary, afraid, or disconnected from each other. And
Right.
that's why this story doesn't feel old to me at all.
No, things haven't changed much.
No, they haven't in a lot of ways.
The conditions these men worked under had been documented, complained about, and ignored for years. Outside the city limits, on suburban projects where union protections were weaker, workers faced unpaid overtime, withheld vacation pay, bounced checks, and threats of deportation leveled at anyone who raised objections. The contractors were paid as little as 50 cents an hour. The provincial regulations that were supposed to govern the industry were, in many cases, drafted during the Edwardian era. Enforcement was so rare as to be nearly theoretical. The men who worked underground, the sand hogs as they were known, occupied the lowest and most dangerous rung of that system. They dug Toronto's water mains and sewer tunnels by hand in compressed air in shafts barely wide enough to turn around in. The compressed air itself was a constant hazard. At elevated pressure, oxygen concentration rises, and fires burn faster and hotter than they would at the surface. The bends, or decompression sickness, was a known occupational affliction. One middle-aged miner interviewed by the Canadian Weekly 2 years after Hogg's Hollow described spending the winter of 1960 to 61 in a wheelchair after being crippled by it. He had worked at 28 pounds of pressure for 16 consecutive hours. No one told me I shouldn't, he later said. Fear was the mechanism that kept the system running. Workers were reluctant to complain for the simplest of reasons. Complaining meant losing the job. Losing the job meant losing the income their families depended on, both in Canada and back in Italy.
My brother worked for municipal public works for years. Actually, he still does, like in sewers, underground infrastructure.
Sure.
The kind of jobs that most people don't think about until something stops working.
They're important jobs once you notice that something's broken, yeah.
Yeah, it ain't glamorous, but when your toilet's not working, you've suddenly my brother's job becomes much more important to you, right?
Right.
I remember worrying about him sometimes, not because he was reckless at all, but just because of the fact that confined spaces are inherently dangerous. Toxic gases, cave-ins, water, machinery, whatever. One mistake underground can become a fatality incredibly fast. But the difference is, he's had over his career protections, training and procedures and safety equipment and union representation. In fact, he's now the union rep, or was. Rules about who could enter and where, under what conditions. And, stories like Hogg's Hollow are part of why those protections that my brother has exist, right?
Yep.
Because a lot of workplace safety regulations are really written in blood. We talk about safety laws now like they're a bureaucracy or inconvenience, but many of them exist because somewhere at some point workers died before anyone decided that the risk mattered enough to regulate.
Yeah.
In many ways, my brother's work was much safer because of the men in these stories.
Yeah. One carpenter interviewed by the Canadian Weekly in 1962 put it plainly, quote, "In 1960, I was a carpenter on an apartment block, and at nights I dreamed awful dreams about a hole on the 5th floor which should have been covered or fenced but wasn't. 100 times a day I walked over or around that hole, and each time I felt sick. But the boss could have got plenty of men to replace me. With a wife and kids, why should I stick my neck out?" End quote. Giovanni Carriglio had arrived in Canada 4 years before his death with his wife, 2 daughters, and aging in-laws to support. With overtime, he was earning $110 a week, more than double what he was making as a cleaner when he first arrived. His younger daughter, Lucia, was taking violin lessons. The family had been talking about buying a house. On the morning of March 17, 1960, he caught the 5:30 a.m. bus to Hogg's Hollow. The Hogg's Hollow water main was not a glamorous project. It was a piece of municipal infrastructure, a new water line intended to connect a pumping station on Wilson Avenue in Armour Heights with the water distribution network at York Mills Road and Victoria Park Avenue. The line ran beneath the Don River. Workers accessed the tunnel via a shaft north of the Hogg's Hollow Bridge. The project was scheduled for completion in the summer of 1959. It never came close. The original contractor, J.H. Harrop Construction Company, ran into financial difficulties and collapsed before the job was done. In July 1959, the Guarantee Company of North America, an American bonding agency, stepped in and took over the contract. Guarantee brought in a second firm, Federally Adjustment Services, to help manage its interests on the ground. The result was a layered, confused chain of command in which responsibility for the project's safety was divided between parties who were, at minimum, unclear who answered to whom, as well as being focused on expediency and the bottom line instead of safety. What was not unclear was the extreme pressure from higher-ups to finish. Federally complained that the job was moving too slowly and costs were rising. Guarantee assigned a representative, Robert Kipp, to the site as an assistant to construction supervisor Murray Frank. Frank had already been raising concerns about the pace of the work and the conditions underground. In the weeks before the fire, he threatened to quit, citing his concerns. His employer called his bluff and did nothing. Murray Frank stayed on. The conditions underground were, by any measure, indefensible. There were no fire extinguishers in the tunnel and no breathing equipment. Nothing. The men worked without hard hats, safety shoes, or any protective clothing. The tunnel operated in near complete darkness. The lights were not functioning, and no flashlights had been provided. As we mentioned, the telephone connecting the tunnel to the surface had been removed for repairs and not replaced. The timber supports were too weak for the conditions. No grout had been applied to the tunnel floor to keep out the sand and silt of the riverbed pressing in from above. There was no standby air compressor in the event of a primary unit failure. Despite all of this, the site had been deemed compliant with existing safety standards. The compressed air that kept the river at bay also made the tunnel a tinderbox, and the men working in it had not been told that. There's one more detail worth noting. The man assigned to operate the decompression chamber, the pressurized lock that workers had to pass through when transitioning between compressed air and the normal atmosphere, could not read English. And you got it, the operating instructions were written exclusively in English. At least one foreman had looked at these conditions and refused to accept them. He raised his objections to management and was fired for it. On the evening of March 17th, Murray Frank again requested that the welding be stopped. The compression chamber west of Yonge Street had been running crews past the point he considered safe. The site boss overruled him and kept the crews underground. At approximately 5:50 p.m., Charles Valentini was inside the tunnel with his crew, welding steel plates, when the shaft filled with noxious fumes. Valentini ran for the pit head. He left 6 men behind. The fire had started the way fires start in compressed air tunnels, fast and without much warning. It was believed that an electrical cable supplying the welding torches had overheated and caught fire. 2 foremen on the surface noticed smoke drifting into the main shaft. Half of the crew, 6 men, made it out through a tunnel running east, surfacing on York Mills Road. They moved immediately to the main shaft and found the valve that was supposed to allow the smoke to blow through the tunnel. They worked it. It was stuck and wouldn't open. North York firefighters arrived quickly. They were told to hold and wait at least 30 minutes before watering the tunnel. The fear was that the water hitting the compressed structure would cause it to collapse. The air compressor was left running in an attempt to clear the smoke. Underground, the 6 men who remained were ringed by rising temperatures, thickening smoke and water and silt seeping through the tunnel floor. In addition to Pasquale Allegrezza, Giovanni Carriglio, Giovanni Fusillo, Alessandro Mantella, and Guido Mantella, there was also Walter Andrzejczuk, a Belgian-born worker who had been on the crew that evening. Andrzejczuk was the only one among the 6 with any experience navigating a crisis underground. He tore his shirt off, soaked it with water, and pressed it against his face. He urged the others to do the same and keep their heads down. They did, for a moment. Then the smoke thickened and the water hit their knees, and the 5 Italians went to their knees for a different reason entirely. They were praying, and they were screaming. Andrzejczuk later described what happened in the tunnel in testimony reported by the Toronto Telegram on March 18, 1960, the next day. Quote, "I tore my shirt off, soaked it in water, and covered my face with it. The other 5 did, but kept their heads up. They started screaming, 'Mamma Mia.' They got down on their knees and started to pray. I couldn't keep them quiet. I told them to stay put, that the boys upstairs would come down and get us out. They wouldn't keep their heads down and conserve energy. The smoke was awful, and then the water hit us. It came up to our knees. I was scared, but I knew they would come and get us out. But the heat was draining our energy. There was a glimmer of hope. I could see a light from the shaft, and I just knew we would be all right. I started back toward the shaft. The other 5 wouldn't come with me. They were screaming and down on their knees praying. I grabbed Pasquale Allegrezza by the shirt and started dragging him along the pipe. There was no room to carry him, and I couldn't fight the smoke any longer. I had to let go of Pasquale. Another few feet, and I had put my face down on the pipe. I was sleepy, and I guess I passed out. Just before I passed out, I was afraid for the first time that I would not get out." End quote.
I've had experience being trapped in heavy smoke during a fire before, and until you're actually inside it, you don't really understand what smoke in a fire situation is like.
Right.
people maybe sometimes imagine like campfire smoke, something annoying, thick maybe, right? But something you can cough through. But fires like this are different. Like fire smoke in an enclosed space feels alive. It's black, it's aggressive, and it shockingly takes over everything almost instantaneously. Your eyes burn, your throat closes, your sense of direction disappears, and every instinct in your body starts screaming at you to get out.
Mm-hmm.
Panic becomes, these guys were panicking, but I don't blame them. Panic becomes incredibly hard to control because your brain realizes very quickly that the air itself has become dangerous.
Right.
And, that detail where he says he became sleepy is really quite terrifying because that's what smoke and carbon monoxide do. Your body starts shutting down while your brain is still trying to survive.
Mm-hmm.
And imagining those men trapped underground in darkness with that heat and the rising water and mud and that kind of smoke closing in around them, it's just claustrophobic even just to hear about.
As many people know, smoke inhalation is what people typically die of in a fire. And when I was younger, I was a member of the junior fire department in my hometown. And we actually got trained on wearing an air pack in a house filled with smoke. It was designed by fire safety officials. They filled this entire place with smoke, and you had to crawl through, find a quote-unquote victim, and assist in bringing them back out.
Yeah.
Through this situation. And I did that. I was in there twice. And what an experience. You cannot see anything in there. And I was, being trained as a firefighter and wearing a mask. I was completely safe, but at the same time, it's terrifying as well because you can't see anything.
Yeah.
Your sense of direction is screwy. Like everything is really, really strange.
Yeah.
So imagine being trapped without any protection at all.
Yeah.
And just horrifying. So somehow Andrechuk kept crawling west toward the exit shaft, and slowly, on his face, and intermittently unconscious for stretches he would never be able to account for. Above him, on the surface of Hogg's Hollow, the scene was deteriorating in its own way. Emergency agencies were arriving. Civic officials, priests, bystanders, relatives who had heard something was wrong and had come to stand at the shaft waiting. The equipment needed to mount a proper rescue, including breathing apparatus, backup compressors, and resuscitators, was largely absent from the site. A civil defense rescue expert would later say in those first critical hours, people were, quote, phoning all over the place for equipment they knew nothing about. Murray Frank and foreman George Sander tried to go down. Sander made it part way. He told the Globe and Mail what he found. Quote, I wanted to go further, but the heat was terrific. I could feel my lungs as though they were going to burst. God knows I tried, but I couldn't make it. I had to come out, end quote. Foreman Jack Corigliano volunteered to go down next. He crawled through the smoke and the sand and the water on his hands and knees until he reached the 5 men. He knew immediately, quote, I could see them lying there. They were dead. I could tell they were dead. I could feel it. I tried to lift one, I don't know who, but there wasn't enough room to get a grip and pull him. If there were 2 of us, we could have done it, but I was all alone on that side of the pipe. It was no use. The smoke was killing me. I had to get back. When I got out, I told the boss that they were in there. He started to cry. I begged him to let me go back in, but he sent me to the hospital, end quote. At around 9 p.m., 3 hours after the fire began, Walter Andrechuk was pulled to the surface. He was delirious, but he was alive. The other 5 men were still down there, and then someone made a decision that would seal their fate and make recovery of their bodies one of the most grueling operations in the city's history. More after a quick break. And we are back. Matthew, thoughts?
There's a line you quoted earlier in the first half that I can't stop thinking about. That line was, no one told me I shouldn't.
Yeah.
That miner talking about working 16 hours under compressed pressure until he ended up crippled in a wheelchair. And I think that sentence captures something essential about power and labor, because when people are desperate enough, they often assume danger is normal, especially immigrants, especially poor workers, especially men in hyper-physical jobs where toughness becomes part of survival. And if nobody tells you that the conditions are unacceptable, eventually you start believing suffering is simply what the work is, right?
Mm.
And what's horrifying about Hogg's Hollow is that the danger wasn't hidden. The unsafe conditions weren't a mystery waiting to be discovered afterwards. People knew.
Yeah.
The missing equipment, the failed comm systems, the lack of training, the lack of inspections that actually mattered, a foreman literally raising concerns and got fired.
Mm-hmm.
This disaster wasn't really caused by one fire. The fire is just the final event of all these other things. What killed the men was a system where productivity mattered more than whether workers got home alive or not, right? And honestly, I don't think that tension has ever really fully gone away.
There was a recent example in Nova Scotia of a young girl working at Walmart, and they had a walk-in oven in the store.
Yeah.
And she was later found deceased
in
that walk-in oven. It closed the store down for some time, but, that situation should not have been able to happen at all.
Yeah.
How in this day and age did that happen? It's one that I want to investigate myself, but there's not a lot of public information. So anyway, these things are still happening today, folks. The people on the surface at Hogg's Hollow knew the worst had occurred. At some point during the chaos, someone turned off the air compressors. It's not entirely clear who gave the order or whether anyone gave an order at all. What is clear is what happened next. The compressed air that had been holding back the Don River, keeping the water and silt from pressing through the tunnel walls and floor, was gone. The pressure dropped, and the river poured in. The tunnel filled with mud. What had been a fire rescue became something else entirely. The 5 men already dead from carbon monoxide poisoning and drowning were now entombed beneath a shifting mass of silt and water so dense that moving through it was nearly impossible. The recovery of their bodies would take days. Pasquale Allegrezza was brought to the surface first at around 2 a.m., 8 hours after the fire began. It took rescuers half an hour to move his body 300 feet. When it reached the surface, the relatives gathered at the shaft screamed. The other 4 took longer, much longer. The heat in the tunnel remained unbearable for days. The silt shifted constantly, closing off passages that had just been cleared. It took nearly 5 days to recover all 4 remaining men. When Alessandro and Guido Mantella were finally reached, they were found huddled together. The Toronto Daily Star ran the story across its entire front page on the morning of March 18th. Photographs lined the top of the page. Joseph Fusillo, Giovanni's brother, being led away from the scene. The tunnel interpreter, the fireman rescuer who had needed oxygen himself, John Barrett, identified as the man who brought out a body. George Sander, the foreman who had tried to go down, photographed with the caption, "Death in his eyes," and Walter Andrzejczyk, the only survivor, captioned simply, "I had to turn back." Below them, in the largest type the paper could fit, "Hope gone for 4 trapped under dawn." The Toronto Telegram the same morning ran those 4 words above the fold that would define the disaster for a generation: sealed in a hellhole. The city was in shock. Within hours of the story breaking, the Italian community had begun organizing. The Italian Immigrant Aid Society started a relief fund for the families of the 5 men. An anonymous contractor offered each surviving family a rent-free apartment for a year. Metro Toronto Chairman Frederick Gardner initiated a public tunnel tragedy fund with a $100 donation. In April, broadcaster Johnny Lombardi organized a benefit concert at Massey Hall. By October, the fund had raised $35,000. The families needed it desperately. Their breadwinners were dead. Giovanni Carriglio's widow, Regina, received $75 a month from the Workmen's Compensation Board, plus $25 a month for their daughter, Lucia. His oldest daughter, Adele, who was studying in the evenings to become a stenographer, earned $40 a week and gave half to the household. Regina worked as a cook for $40 a week. The family was not destitute, but the Canadian weekly journalist Alan Edmonds, who visited them 2 years later, recorded what Regina said when asked about how she was holding up. She paused. She twisted her fingers. She said, "But I am so lonely." In Italian, she called Canada La Terra dei Dolori, not the land of hopes, but the land of sorrows.
Yeah, and that's such a heartbreaking line because it cuts straight through the mythology of immigration. We tend to tell immigration stories publicly through achievement and success and home ownership and opportunity. The triumphant version parents tell children later so that the sacrifice feels meaningful to them.
Right.
Underneath that, there's often enormous loneliness. You leave behind a language of family, familiarity, social status, instinct, even simple things like humor and expressions in food and how people talk to each other suddenly become work. And for a lot of immigrants, especially in that era, there was this constant feeling of being needed economically, but not fully belonging culturally. So then your husband dies building infrastructure in a country that still barely sees you as part of itself. So La Terra dei Dolori, the land of sorrows, honestly, that feels less like bitterness to me and more like exhaustion from this poor woman.
Yeah, definitely. The 5 dead men had only been in Toronto for a short time. They'd come for work, they'd found it, and the city that had consumed their labor was now, in the days after March 17th, beginning to ask, haltingly, and in some sections of the city, not at all, whether it had any obligation to the men who had built it. The answer, it turned out, depended entirely on who you asked. The names of the dead workers appeared in newspapers. Their photographs, where photographs existed, ran alongside the headlines. But in the days after March 17, 1960, the 5 men of Hogg's Hollow were still largely abstractions to the city that had employed them. Before the inquests, the commissions, and the legislation, it is worth accounting for who they actually were. Pasquale Allegrezza was the first man recovered from the tunnel and brought to the surface in the early hours of March 18th. He was buried in a cemetery in Thornhill. 2 years later, a journalist attempting to locate all 5 men could not find his name in the cemetery records. Of the 5, he left the smallest paper trail. Giovanni Carriglio was 44 years old. He'd arrived in Canada 4 years before his death with his wife Regina and their 2 daughters, Adele and Lucia. He first worked as a cleaner at a Toronto bar, then moved the family to Elliott Lake in northern Ontario, where he tried and failed to find work as a miner. Back in Toronto, he turned to construction. Giovanni Fusillo was 28 years old, from the village of Caprino in southern Italy. His niece, Grace, interviewed by the Toronto Star 40 years later after the disaster, said her father, Giovanni's brother Joseph, photographed being led away from the shaft on the night of March 17th, quote, "It was always a story," she said. "That father never really finished telling," end quote. It was too painful. Alessandro and Guido Mantella, the 2 men found huddled together in the tunnel, were brothers from Palmerston Avenue. A week after the disaster, a requiem mass was held for Fusillo and the Mantella brothers at St. Agnes Roman Catholic Church. Among those present was Frank Drea, a reporter with the Toronto Telegram who had been covering the construction industry and its treatment of immigrant workers for some time. All 5 men had come to Canada through the same labor pipeline within the last 4 years. They'd taken the same kinds of jobs and worked under the same conditions. Their deaths were not anomalies. In the 8 remaining months of 1960, after Hogg's Hollow, 12 more construction workers died on the job in metropolitan Toronto. In 1961, 20 more were killed, most of them in the suburbs. What set Hogg's Hollow apart from the 150 or so individual construction fatalities in the Toronto area was the simultaneity of it. 5 men, 1 tunnel, 1 night. Frank Drea understood. As Kenneth Bagnall would later write in Canadese, a portrait of the Italian Canadians, that Hogg's Hollow had not come out of nowhere. It had come from a system that didn't work in workers' favor. And as of the morning of March 18, 1960, that system was still running. The question was whether anyone with power had the will to change it. The coroner's inquest into the deaths of the 5 men opened on March 31, 1960, 2 weeks after the disaster. Ontario Attorney General Kelso Roberts had announced it the day after the fire. Assistant Deputy Attorney General Eric Silk represented the Crown. Dr. D.K. McAteer and Dr. Ralph Johns, the North York coroners who had examined the bodies, conducted the proceedings. What came out over the following weeks was not surprising to anyone who had worked in the suburban construction industry, but it was the first time it had been laid out in public, in detail and under oath. The management of the Hogg's Hollow project had been a study in competing interests and diffused accountability from the moment Guarantee Company of North America took over from J.H. Harrop. Testimony established that the transition from Harrop to Guarantee and Federley had created genuine confusion over who bore responsibility for safety on the site. Murray Frank, the construction supervisor who had threatened to quit over safety concerns in the weeks before the fire and had been overruled on the evening of March 17th, testified about the conditions under which he had been working, and so did others. The picture painted was stark. The inquest confirmed one by one every deficiency that common sense had already suggested. The violations weren't subtle, they were not technical, they were basic, and they had been present on the site from the beginning. As we mentioned, the foreman who raised the issue of the lack of safety on the site with management before the tragedy was fired for it. That came out in the inquest. Management could not claim that they didn't know. Their ignorance was willful. The CCF, which means Cooperative Commonwealth Federation, the Federal Democratic Socialist Party that would later become the NDP, and their leader, Donald MacDonald, used the inquest testimony to call for the resignation of Labour Minister Charles Daly, charging that Daly had misled the legislature when he declared the day after the accident that the Hogg's Hollow job had been carried out in accordance with regulations. The departmental inspector assigned to the project had admitted at the inquest that he had not advised the minister of this. MacDonald told the legislature, quote, "In other words, we appear to be faced with a situation that the minister informed this House that all regulations were conformed with when his own inspector's views were never sought." End quote. Attorney General Roberts, according to MacDonald's demands, acknowledged that his department had received information showing that quite a number of employers of labor were possibly exploiting workers. He described the neglect of proper subsurface safety regulations as long-standing and shocking. He stopped short of calling for Daly's resignation, but promised that present safety regulations would be gone over with a fine-tooth comb. The coroner's jury delivered its verdict. The deaths of the 5 men were preventable. They were, the jury found, quote, "the inevitable result of the failure to implement and enforce regulations." The jury condemned what it called fly-by-night or fast buck contractors for selfish disregard of safety measures for the sake of added profit. End quote. Coroner Dr. F.W. Tickett was direct. Quote, "It's all too common for companies to regard time and costs as more important than safety." End quote. John H. Ort, the provincial inspector assigned to the Hogg's Hollow Sanitary Sewer Tunnel project, testified before the Royal Commission on Industrial Safety that followed the inquest. He disagreed with the jury's verdict. The Hogg's Hollow job, he said, was fundamentally safe. Commissioner J.D. Bateman challenged him. The testimony at the inquest had shown that many regulations had been violated. The decompression rate had not been corrected. Smoking had been occurring openly in compressed air. Many men had never received medical examinations or training. Some of these things, Bateman said, were going on continuously. No criminal charges were laid.
Yeah, and this is always the part that leaves a bad taste in people's mouths after disasters like this, because, over and over again, we see mass casualty events where everyone agrees terrible decisions were made, where corners were cut, right? Warnings existed systems failed, and yet somehow like nobody ends up criminally responsible. The organization pays a fine maybe, or reports are written, or recommendations get issued. Politicians promise reform, right? But prison or personal accountability, almost never. And I think part of the reason people become cynical is because ordinary people understand instinctively that if one individual caused 5 deaths through reckless negligence, they'd go to jail. But once responsibility gets spread across corporations and departments and contractors and managers and insurers and bureaucracy, accountability starts dissolving into paperwork. Like everybody contributed, so apparently nobody's responsible. And we still see that pattern again and again today. Like, look at that tower fire that happened in London.
Grenfell, I talked about that in my book.
Grenfell. Nobody has gone to jail because of Grenfell.
Yep, it's disgusting. The inquest simply gave the Italian community a formal record of what they already knew. The system that had killed 5 men at Hogg's Hollow was the same system their husbands and brothers and fathers were climbing into every morning still. The verdict changed nothing on its own, but it handed the community something to point to. The organizing had already begun before the inquest closed. Union pioneers had been soliciting members among the Italian construction workers for months with little success. The fear of losing work had kept men quiet and unorganized for years. Hogg's Hollow broke that. Within weeks of the disaster, thousands of workers were attending meetings and demanding union recognition. The Brandon Hall Group, named after the hall on Brandon Avenue where members of the 5 unions covering laborers, bricklayers, carpenters, plasterers, and cement masons met. They drew over 6,000 construction workers in a matter of weeks. 95% of them were Italian. They signed up and called strikes to force employers to recognize contracts. That summer, there was a bitter strike. In 1961, another more violent than the first. Over 100 strikers were convicted of violence while picketing or raiding sites. The provincial government, faced with open revolt in the suburbs, appointed 2 royal commissions. Premier Frost named Judge J.P. McAndrew to head a 3-man royal commission on industrial safety. He appointed Montreal lawyer H. Carl Goldenberg as a 1-man commission to find what the Star Weekly called the final solution to the industry's troubles. An unfortunate name, anyway. Goldenberg's report condemned contractors for exploitation, including on government-financed housing projects, and urged that some form of licensing be enforced. He advocated for maximum hours of work and minimum wage scales, $2 an hour for tradesmen, $1.30 for others, which were the same minimums then in force in British Columbia. He proposed methods to outlaw exploitation and bring peace to the industry. Bruno Zanini, Italian-born co-director of the Brandon Hall Immigrants Group, was not satisfied. Quote, "The government has done a half-hearted job," he said. "We must have some form of licensing so authority can control the industry. I doubt whether the watered-down legislation so far introduced will solve anything." End quote. And the deaths continued. On October 5th of that year, a laborer named Mario Reda fell from the 11th floor of a 12-story apartment project. He was 26 years old. He had wanted to become a barber. His widow Maria was left with 3 children, Maria 4, Antoinetta 2, and Luigi 1. Through an interpreter, the woman explained why the family had stayed in Canada despite everything. Quote, "My Mario wanted the kids to be raised as Canadian," she said, "so we stay." The coroner at Mario's inquest was Dr. F.W. Tickett, the same coroner who had presided over the Hogg's Hollow proceedings. He blamed the company for inadequate supervision and breaches of the Building Trades Protection Act. The inquest jury blamed the company. Again, no charges followed. It was a pattern that the Italian community had learned to recognize. The inquest produced verdicts, the verdicts produced commissions, the commissions produced reports, and the men kept falling. Ontario Labour Minister Harold Warrender introduced new safety laws on April 4, 1962. The timing was noted by at least one journalist. It was the day that Giovanni Carriglio's widow, Regina, after 2 years of unbroken mourning in black, changed into ordinary clothes. The new Construction Safety Act required on-site decompression chambers with trained attendants, mandatory gas testing in tunnels, fire equipment, and bi-weekly inspection trips. Toronto City Council established a squad of 4 safety inspectors, 2 of whom were Italian-speaking, with the authority to order work to stop on any site found to have unsafe conditions. Contractors operating in the province were required to be licensed so that safety infractions could result in license revocation. Enforcement, for the first time, carried real consequences. It was not everything the community had demanded. Bruno Zanini said so plainly, but it was the first substantial overhaul of Ontario's construction safety laws in nearly 40 years. The McAndrew Commission's findings had been incorporated into Warrender's new Construction Safety Act, which would later become the foundation of the Canada Labour Safety Code. In time, Ontario would develop some of the lowest construction accident rates in North America. Over the decades, the memory of Hogg's Hollow faded. Outside of labor circles and the Italian-Canadian community, it became a footnote, if it was remembered at all. No plaque marked the site. No memorial acknowledged the 5 men by name. The city that they helped build went on without them. It was only as the 40th anniversary approached in 2000 that the silence began to break. Costi Immigration Services, the successor organization to the Italian Immigrant Aid Society, that had started the relief fund in the days after the disaster, commissioned Toronto artist Laurie Swim to create a commemorative quilt. Swim's work, titled Breaking Ground, the Hoggs Hollow Disaster 1960, depicted the 5 men and the tunnel where they died. It was 2 meters by 6 meters. Mayor Mel Lastman declared Hoggs Hollow Memorial Disaster Day. The city erected a plaque near the site. On March 17, 2000, 40 years to the day of the tragedy, hundreds of construction workers left their shifts on the Shepherd Subway project and came to Hoggs Hollow for a ceremony organized by the Toronto Central Ontario Building Trades Council. They heard eyewitness accounts from Frank Drea and rescuers Nestor Buczynski and John Barrett, who had volunteered to enter the smoke-filled tunnel on the night of March 17, 1960, and had carried its weight ever since. Buczynski, one of the rescuers who had gone into the tunnel that night, had spent more than 30 years working underground after Hoggs Hollow. Quote, "They never gave you much to protect yourselves," he said, remembering. The memorial quilt spent another decade in storage before finding its permanent home in 2010 at the York Mills subway station, built in part by the generation of Italian workers who had come after the men of Hoggs Hollow. It hangs in the mezzanine. Thousands of commuters pass it every day. In 2011, the Hoggs Hollow disaster was designated a National Historic Event by the National Historic Sites and Monuments Board. Pasquale Allegrezza, Giovanni Carriglio, Giovanni Fusillo, Alessandro Mantella, and Guido Mantella. Their names are on the quilt. Their names are on the plaque. Their names are in the legislation that followed them, written as Bruno Zanini and other Italian labor leaders had demanded into law. And that is it for Dark Poutine episode 422, The Hoggs Hollow Disaster. That's right. It's time for voicemails. You can leave us a message at 1-877-327-5786 or 1-877-DARK-PTN. We'd love to hear from you. Let's see who called us this week. And we have a couple of voicemails this week, Matthew. Let's have a listen.
Hey, Mike and Matthew, Carrie and Aurelia. I was just wondering, what was a grasshopper's favorite sport? Cricket. Go shit in your hat. Bye.
Cricket.
That's hilarious. So I was once playing Trivial Pursuit with my husband,
Yeah.
And when the person who's winning goes in the middle, and then the other person gets to ask like a question from any category to get to do the final win. I don't know if you've ever played Trivial Pursuit. So
I love Trivial Pursuit.
So
yes.
I thought I was being a smartass by, first of all, choosing sport, right? And secondly, choosing a cricket question. And I did not even understand the question that I was asking when I read it.
Oh, boy.
And my husband got it right. And I was like, how the hell, Mr. Gay Boy who doesn't do sports, right?
Yeah.
How the hell did you get that question right?
I bet you I know.
Tell me.
He's Indian and British.
He's Indian and British, and he played cricket in high school.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah. So I had at least 2/3 of it right.
Yeah.
But so he played in high school. Wow, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, he had the cricket whites and everything,
Oh, wow. I bet he looked darn cute in those cricket whites, Matthew.
He's destroyed all old photos of himself.
Oh, what a shame. I wonder why he did that. Oh, I guess, Justin's a quiet guy,
Yeah. Well, no, he also was the chubby kid in school.
Oh, well, he's fit now.
Yeah.
That's for sure. Yeah. But that's been a lot of hard work, I imagine. All right, we have another voicemail. Oh, we forgot to give that guy a job and stuff, Matthew.
Sports commentator.
So he's a sport commentator.
Yeah,
okay, that makes sense.
And he covered the last big cricket game, obviously.
In Orillia. I'm sure there's lots of cricket in Orillia, Ontario. All right, here's another voicemail.
Hi, Mike. Hi, Matthew. It's Stephanie calling from London, Ontario. But I'm actually a transplant. I'm really from Gabriola Island, British Columbia. So when I listen to the podcast, which I do frequently, and even though I'm not a lifer, I'm a long-time listener, when you play the theme song and the BC ferry whistles, I just feel comforted and maybe a bit homesick. Anyways, I've been meaning to call and leave this message since episode 333, the Rosedale murders. Those poor teenagers, Dutch-descended teenagers in the valley on the Fraser River. And the reason I really wanted to call about that was the psychiatrist who was the person for the defense who defended the murderer, William Madsen, I believe his name was called Dr. James Tyhurst. And I'm pretty sure Tyhurst is dead now, so we can say nasty things about him. But I don't know if you guys were aware that he was indicted on molesting these women in his office. And he actually lived on Gabriola when I was a teenager there. So this would have been for about 20 years. He was molesting these women, bondage, whips and chains, and horrible things were happening to these poor women who finally came forward to the Vancouver police. So when you guys mentioned Jim Tyhurst on this podcast, 333, I couldn't believe it. And I used to see Dr. Tyhurst on the Gabriola Ferry when we went to school. Once you reached high school or junior high school on Gabriola, you had to go to Nanaimo, and so you took a 20-minute ferry ride every day. And Tyhurst would be in his little Volkswagen, smoking a pipe, looking very proper, but he always kind of gave me the creeps. And I think he was on the Islands Trust. I remember my parents talking about him, and nobody would have guessed. Anyways, maybe that's worth a future episode. I don't know. Although hopefully nobody died. Anyways, love the show and love everything about it, and all the work you do and the history and the broad-mindedness and wonderful things that you write and that you have to say. And keep up the good work. And I hope I call again sometime and won't leave it so long. Okay, bye for now. Take care.
Oh, thanks, Stephanie. That was great. She had a lot to say, probably because she's been listening a while and meaning to call. But
And I love her. I love her theory. Once they're dead, we can talk shit about them.
right. Well, I actually came across that in my research, and I thought that is so vast and something that really needs focus. So I didn't approach it in the episode because that would have been a rabbit hole that I would have been down for page after page after page of research, frankly. So she's right. We should probably tackle that at some point. My problem with doing those kind of things, she kind of said it, is nobody died. And what you have left over are people who may be listening to their story. You know, I struggled with families in that regard. I mean, we had an email from Lucas Strasser-Hurd's sister about the episode we did about him. She gave me some corrections, some things that I left out of the episode. So I went back and I added them to the episode after it was published. So it was republished again on Tuesday. But she said she really loved what we did in talking about her brother and how well we did talking about him as a human being. So a little feather in our cap there. I like that. You know, I know these stories are hard for people to hear, and I always am mindful of that. And that's why I don't want anything we do to be salacious. I never want it to be that. What does Stephanie do there in London, hailing from Gabriele Island, Matthew?
Well, you know, I don't like. I was just sitting there thinking, like, I wonder what the journey from Gabriola to London, Ontario was. You know?
Yeah.
I once booked a cabin on Gabriola Island by myself for a week. I just wanted, and there was like a big storm the weekend. I didn't want to get on the ferry in that stormy weather, so I never went. So I've never gone to Gabriola, but I really want to. And there's a restaurant that I want to try. I cannot remember the name of it or even if it's still there, but there's supposedly a very good restaurant on that island. I don't know. She's in London, so I'm going to say she works in insurance.
She works in insurance in London.
Yeah, big insurance companies in London, yeah.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for calling, Stephanie. We really appreciate you. That's it for this week's voicemails. Again, you can leave us one at 1-877-327-5786 or 1-877-DARK-PTN. We'd love to hear from you, even if it is just to say hi and to tell us to go shit in our hats. If you're stumped for what to chat with us about, a quick story is welcome. It's time for Donut Money donors and patrons. We do have a new patron this week, Matthew, from Crofton, British Columbia, and her name is Alyssa Thompson. Thank you, Alyssa.
Crofton, British Columbia.
Yes.
So that's on the island, isn't it?
I don't know where Crofton is, Matthew.
North, how do you say Cowichan? Cowichan? North Cowichan?
Yes.
How do you say that? Is that right? Cowichan?
North Cowichan, yeah.
Okay. I still am getting used to how you pronounce so many things.
Yeah.
You know?
The names tend to come from indigenous names and are anglicized anyway, so.
Yeah, so it's sometimes you have to wrap your tongue around them.
Yeah.
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 No, I think she gives. Well, there's a mill there, but I don't think she works. I don't think she works at the mill. I think she does lessons for what are those little things called? Kayaks. Kayak lessons. Yeah, kayak.
She gives
lessons.
kayak lessons on the island. Oh, okay, yeah. That's nice. There you go.
Wouldn't that be a nice job being outside?
It would be a
nice
job. We also have a PayPal donation from Tom Batch, Bache, or it could be Bache or Bache, if it's but it's not Bach, I don't think. But Tom says, love the show. I don't know where Tom's from, though, Matthew, or what he does.
Tom is also from the island.
Oh, he's also from the island. Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
That's good.
I think he's from the more northern tip of the island. You know what? I think he just spends his time fishing.
There you go. That's
Yeah.
kind of nice. Just fishing.
I really want to take my brother on like a fishing trip some year here, because my brother loves doing stuff like that. But it is so expensive to like get somebody to take you out into the ocean to go fishing.
Yeah.
Which is fair if you imagine the gas prices and insurance and everything else, but it's so much money.
Yeah. Okay, next up, we have another Donut Money donor, and this Donut Money donor comes to us through our new buymeacoffee.com. People really seem to like donating there. You can even set a donation up to be monthly if you want. I don't think anybody's done that.
Hint, hint.
Big hint. But no, nobody's done that yet, and you don't have to. This person...
Stop underselling yourself. So, of course you don't have to, but it would be very nice because in the world of podcasts, things are tough. So Mike's always shy about doing it, but I'm not going to be shy about, hey guys, if you like the show, send a bit of money. You know, nobody's getting rich off this.
No, definitely not.
And we want
nobody's getting rich. Nobody's getting paid.
Mike's scraping a living together right now.
Oh,
But by liking, by like giving us stars and thumbs up and everything online, and by sending us a bit of money, if you can do it regularly, that's great. If you can just give a little bit, that's great. It's super helpful, and we're asking just to keep the show going. We're not going to be splashing out on a Ferrari or anything. So send us a few bucks if you can. If you can't, we get it. But if you can, go for it.
Oh, thanks, man.
For the price of a weekly coffee, you can
right,
save
exactly.
dark
I think that's why it's called. That's why it's called Buy Me a Coffee, because it's that idea. So we have Jillian, and she doesn't give her last name. She says, "I'm almost caught up on all the episodes, and I think you guys deserve some support. You're both awesome. I listen to your podcast because it helps calm my brain. Thank you so much." Oh my gosh. Well, that's nice.
Thanks for calling us awesome, but you're more awesome because you listen to us.
Thanks, Jillian. And I don't know where Jillian is from or what Jillian does for a living.
Jillian lives in Luxembourg.
Luxembourg. I have relatives in Luxembourg.
Do you?
I do. I have
have you ever met
relatives
them?
all over that. No.
Oh.
No. I do not. I have not. I want to meet my relatives in Netherlands very soon. I would like to, because Rude's not doing the best. Rude Wolf, my cousin. Yes, his name is Rude Wolf, but it's Rude with 2 U's.
So anyway. I think she lives in Luxembourg, and she works at Comme à la Maison, Italian beauty food.
Oh, there you go. Well,
isn't that a funny name? Comme à la maison, just like home, I guess that says in French. Italian beauty food. I'm not sure what beauty food is, but there you go.
Well, I can tell you, I don't make beauty food. I keep it simple, and I make enough for my whole week. I had to buy a big pot and a new skillet that is very deep, a 6-quart skillet, because I make such huge meals. So
do you make them and freeze them for the week?
I just put them in the fridge because I'm eating them as the week goes on, so I don't need to freeze them. Yeah.
Nice.
Well, thank you, Jillian, very much.
I made a cottage pie last night.
Oh, I love cottage pie so much.
Yeah, it was a Mary Berry one, so a little.
The book that I gave you?
Indeed, sir. Indeed.
Oh, that's nice. I like that. That makes me all warm in the dead cockles of my little gray heart.
It makes you warm in your dead cock.
There's that too.
I've done almost every recipe in that book now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
Have some really stood out to you, or, well, obviously cottage pie.
Honestly, it's really interesting. Like, I go online and get recipes sometimes, right? But I have 2 Mary Berry cookbooks, 2 Gordon Ramsay's, and a Jamie Oliver cookbook.
Mm-hmm.
Those 4 or however many books that is, I can't count.
It's around 4.
Are the bases of what I cook. Like,
there you go.
Just out of those books, there's so many things that I like, and obviously my taste leans. They're all British cooks, but there's different. Like, there's Italian recipes, versions of stuff in there. But yeah, those books are where I get to the majority of it.
They're not the typical British cook. That's all, as my friend LJ says, carbs and brown.
Well, I mean, if you think of any working class food, it's carbs and brown.
It's true. Yeah.
Right.
Yep. Definitely.
Yeah, I grew up on carbs and brown.
Yeah, we all did.
Yeah.
Thanks to all our patrons and Donut Money donors, past and present, for your generosity. It helps to keep the show going. You can become a patron of Dark Poutine at patreon.com/darkpoutine. For a one-time donation, you can send us donut money via PayPal or interact using our email address, darkpoutinepodcast@gmail.com. If you don't already subscribe to the show, it would mean a lot if you did. You can easily find Dark Poutine on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. If you haven't gotten yours yet, my 2 books are available to order via links on the Dark Poutine website or anywhere fine books are sold. And speaking of darkpoutine.com, check it out for show notes and other cool stuff. We'd appreciate it if you gave Dark Poutine a like or a follow on Facebook and Instagram. Most importantly, thank you for listening. Tell your friends about us. Word of mouth is a powerful thing. And that is it for this episode of Dark Poutine. So until next time, don't forget to be a good egg and not a bad apple.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.